In the final scene of Federico Fellini's film 8½, Guido the director decides to bring together all the characters of the film to participate in a circle dance led by a group of clowns directed by a young flutist. The child slowly remains alone in a lit spot in the darkness and then moves away toward a corner of the scene to disappear, and the film ends. Fellini's idea of the final circle dance is at the same time consoling and funerary, much like in the dances of skeletons in silly symphonies, where a playful theme connects to the medieval macabre dance theme. We could predict this final touch from certain clues present in the film, and also from the reluctance that the protagonist has in deciding to conclude it. Guido does not really want to make the film, it seems, and he does not want to finish it either because he is terrified by the word end in every aspect of his life, and in particular he is terrified by that final use of the word end, which is death. The film constantly presents an element of joy in life and another that reveals the anguish of death, a kind of nostalgia for the events of life at the same time as they happen, knowing that it is something ephemeral and that, as things happen, they fall into the past, as if the present were nothing but the edge of a precipice. The melancholic characteristic of art and cinema can be seen as a recognition that life is transitory and fleeting. We watch a film or experience another form of art like a painting or sculpture, and we are struck by the immediacy of the experience. We see the characters as if they are alive, captured in motion or posed in stasis. But we also know that while the characters live and move, the people who played them are no longer there, or at least not the same anymore. This is the poignant sensation we feel when we watch old family films or look at old photographs. Cinema, in particular, has the ability to capture time in a specific way, and so it can be an especially powerful medium for exploring the theme of mortality. Unlike other art forms, cinema can capture motion and sound, and so it can make us feel as if we are truly in the moment with the characters, even as we are aware that the moment has already passed. Therefore, Guido's and Fellini's anguish over the making and conclusion of the film relates to this question: what will become of all this? What will become of me after the word end appears on the screen? We can ask ourselves, along with Guido and Fellini, if the film ends, is the film still alive? The original idea for the end of the film was more funereal than this. In the originally planned ending, all of the characters would gather, dressed in white, inside a railroad car that departed for an unknown destination. Then, Fellini shot the circle dance scene, which was only intended to promote the film, and upon reviewing it, he decided that it was a better conclusion, particularly since the presence of the child indicated hope, the fact that the future is open. The child exits the last frame, perhaps to reappear in the first frame of the next film. Once again, Fellini finds in childhood a support that does not betray nor abandon him. It is curious that in the human imagination, the anguish of death is associated with dance, as in the case of medieval dance macabre that we mentioned, but in modern times, in situations related to Halloween festivities and Gothic literature, such as Wednesday's dance in the Addams Family, or the dance that possesses the characters in Beetlejuice.
Stack banana till the morning come. Daylight come and me one go home. Come, Mr. Tallyman, tally me banana. Daylight come and me one go home. Come, Mr. Tallyman, tally me banana.
Infantile elements and tragic symbols, when reduced to a manipulable dimension through play or dance, can provide a means of confronting fears and preserving a childish element within the anxieties of adulthood. The child who plays with their own fears, making monsters dance, is the child from Maurice Sendak's story Where the Wild Things Are, adapted into a film by director Spike Jonze. The monsters are tamed but never completely, offering the possibility of showing a wild side that is not afraid to confront the scariest evils that populate children's imaginations. The presence of the child in the final scene of Eight and a Half is a culmination of the youthful presence in post-war Italian cinema, and neorealist cinema in particular. In the films of De Sica and Rossellini, children served as a benchmark for adult values, often demystifying them and representing a pure and renewed perspective on reality. In Eight and a Half, the child, in his white suit, perhaps represents the central symbolic figure of the film. He leads the dance in which everyone participates like the Pied Piper and accompanies us at the end, like a true demiurge, a being who opens and closes the doors of different worlds. The presence of children in works of art throughout history has been associated with symbolic figures such as the Christ child or Cupid, at least until the Renaissance. At a certain point, however, children begin to appear more independently of the societal symbolism imposed on them. For example, in Carotto's painting, a boy simply displays a childish drawing, perhaps an allegory for the artist and his creativity nourished by childhood roots. Starting in the 1700s, we begin to see children in paintings displaying their toys and playing activities without adult presence. These children represent a great innovation in Western societies, that of the consciousness of a sort of childhood autonomy. Suddenly, children are no longer miniature adults, but are considered beings with their own characteristics and potentials. Children can see things that adults cannot, and they can communicate with worlds that are inaccessible to adults, such as in Steven Spielberg's film E.T., where children are the only ones able to communicate with the alien. In E.T., the children, thanks to their connection with a power inaccessible to adults, lead a sort of dance with their bicycles, flying over the heads of the police, becoming unreachable. The children from E.T. fly in an aerial dance, with the moon as their backdrop, while in the last images of Eight and a Half, the child is found alone, in a barren, moon-like landscape, similar to the asteroid on which the little prince from Saint-Exupéry's story lives. They lead the dance like the child in Eight and a Half, though his image ultimately finds itself isolated on a blank screen like a digital image on an alpha layer. The child stands out from the context. He needs nothing else, in a moment resembling Manet's Flautist, who emerges from a neutral background like a monument to the separateness of childhood from the adult world. As Western culture begins to develop an awareness of childhood, it emerges as a consciousness of separateness, as a world with its own rules that must somehow be preserved from the invasive pedagogy, ideology, or direct predation of adults. This separateness is what we see, declined in different ways, in Alice by Lewis Carroll, 1865, in Pinocchio by Collodi, 1881, in Peter Pan by Barrie, 1902, in Little Nemo by Mackay, 1905, in The Little Prince by Saint-Exupéry, 1945, in Peanuts by Schultz, 1952, in Max From Where the Wild Things Are by Sendak, 1965, just to name a few of the most important. These child characters declare their relative autonomy from the adult world in different ways and with different degrees of complexity, but they do so mainly by circumscribing an imaginary and symbolic world in which the constraints of adult logic are loosened or even subverted, and a perceptual shift of reality is produced. In these works, produced by adults in tribute to childhood, a subtle breeze of melancholy blows, because effective as the adult's attempt may be to retrace that lost time, it is somehow lost forever, defeated by the flow of chronological irreversibility. Yet, at the moment when we abandon ourselves to the fable proposed by these authors, we enter a space where melancholy is at least forgotten, if not abolished, because in that attempt to restore childhood, the creative act is produced that not only reproduces it, but somehow reinstates it. In creative work, there is a childhood that does not pass, does not end. It continues to work or play, undaunted, focused. And in that concentration, melancholy does not exist, has no place, and is nothing but a possible productive element, a resource. What Csikszentmihalyi defines as a flow experience, a state of concentration or complete absorption with the activity at hand, is produced. It is a state in which people are so engaged in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. This experience, closely associated with the childhood experience of play, is not precluded to adults, provided that it is possible to activate a sort of inner child capable of managing an autonomous world with its internal rules, like the characters of the authors we discussed. So how does 8.5 end? How should we interpret the child's exit from the scene? Does the child exit only to appear in a future film or a future life situation? The melancholic end of Carlo Collodi's Pinocchio story sees a flesh-and-blood child watching his old, now inanimate wooden self. We do not know for certain, but Pinocchio, having become a flesh-and-blood child, will probably abandon the burlesque and somewhat wild approach to life of the puppet. Is becoming an adult returning to the ranks, to normalcy? We don't believe this is the fate of the child in 8.5. Even if Fellini possibly harbors some concerns about preserving this childlike image, this purity of spirit that, through his protagonist Guido, he confesses to fear losing throughout the film. In an earlier film, François Truffaut's The 400 Blows, whose protagonist is a child, the film ends with the child's escape from the world of adults and his arrival at a beach where he can contemplate the sea. In the final scene of Truffaut's film, the child looks directly at the camera as if in a moment of reflection with the viewer. Even though he leaves the scene, the child can only represent a deferment to something that is yet to come and can only contradict the word end that appears on the cinema screen at the conclusion of the film. There will be something else. A question remains. And it's a question about creativity. What does it mean to be an artist? What does it mean to be creative? What relationship does this have with childhood? How important is it to not forget one's childhood in order to be creative? Fellini's film, with its constant references to a world that seems to have passed, but which is actually continually active, and which is the driving force behind his current abilities, seeks to answer these questions. The crisis-ridden director Guido must find that child, must connect with that child, not because it is a figure of the past, but because that child represents his future, the vital force that gives him the possibility to continue creating.